We have started the podcast. Thank you guys so much for being with us for this first episode of the podcast. We're calling it the podcast because
it's the only one.
We'll get in. Yeah, it's the only one, baby.
The only one worth listening to.
Welcome. Once you've listened to this, all other podcasts are deleted. I promise. Go check once it ends. But we're going to go ahead and introduce each other, and we'll get into a whole bunch of details, so stick with us. But everybody, this is James Teutschmann. Salute. James Teutschmann is the campus youth pastor of our Shadow Lake campus at Calvary in Bellevue, Nebraska. If you're listening from any other place across the country, we're just a 5-campus church, one church, multiple locations in Bellevue, Papillion, and Glenwood, Iowa, in Nebraska and Iowa.
Or like the southwest suburb of Omaha.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's who we are. James is our campus youth pastor. James also buys houses, flips them, and is selling them and managing them. And so that's a side hustle. James loves Nebraska football. I know for sure. Loves Nebraska football. Loves LeBron James. All kinds of sports.
I'd like to just add. I just want to start the podcast with this. If you don't like LeBron James, that only fuels me liking him more. And so just don't tell me. Just don't say anything.
It's a raging inferno of
It's
love.
a raging inferno if you say that you don't like LeBron. And it just adds to it.
Unquenchable fire.
If that's the only reason I like him so much is because so many people tell me they don't like him. But just over time, I'm just like, someone has to love him.
Someone's gotta.
And it's me.
I bet LeBron James likes himself a little bit too.
Yeah,
right?
probably. He's probably got a good life. Hey guys, this is Zayne. He's the student pastor over at the Glenwood campus. Zayne's a great friend of mine. He's a great rock climber. He's hilarious. I think he's funny. He also loves Nebraska football. I think probably more than I do. Honestly, it's not a maybe. I know Zayne likes Nebraska football more than I do. Zayne, question for you: do you dislike Iowa more or Texas more?
Texas. I dislike Texas more because I've disliked them for longer.
Yeah, I remember when I was in 6th grade, I am sorry to say this, but we had this project where, or 5th grade, you were supposed to write to like a school and see if they would send you something. And I did write to the Texas baseball team, and they sent me a bunch of signed cards of all their baseball players.
Did you burn them immediately?
Well, first of all, the joke was on me, because that was the year that Jabba Chamberlain and Alex Gordon played for Nebraska. And there's no one good that played for Texas. But everyone I don't know why everyone thought it was cool to root for Texas, because they were good at the Culture Series. So.
Yeah, well.
I'm sorry to say that.
I have connections to Texas baseball, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I probably threw all of that stuff away immediately.
Well, yeah, I don't care at all.
Yeah.
That's the best thing. Texas is awful.
I actually just got it for firewood.
Oh, well, that's a good use, yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. That's
no, but that's super good. And, yeah, we both huge Nebraska sports fans.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a lot of people on this podcast, so most of them are Nebraska sports fans. So we won't let that interfere with the core message of what we're going to be doing this podcast for. Yeah. But we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to joke around. We're going to talk about goofy stuff, but we're also going to have a main focus. And the main purpose of the podcast is that we're just going to dive deep into a range of topics. As of right now, it's very broad, so that in the future we can kind of nail things down and get specific about certain things. But the main purpose of what we're doing right now is to take a look at the Bible and apply that to our lives, and just really come up with questions of ourselves that we can answer through studying the Bible and applying it. But also, as campus youth pastors, we preach on Wednesday nights, and we know that we can't get everything that we want to say on that topic into a 15-minute message on a Wednesday night. And yes, we are campus youth pastors, but I also serve on the creative team, and so I have a lot of interests and a lot of worship inside of me that I love to dive into. And James serves on part of the financial team. I
do a lot of like local missions.
Yeah.
Which is great. I love it. That's what I'm super passionate about.
Yeah, so we're very multifaceted in our roles at Calvary, and that's the beautiful thing I think about our church and about the church as a whole. When you're a part of the church, you're not just somebody that walks in and sits down and does stuff. If it's in my opinion, if it's a solid foundational church, people recognize what you're passionate about and what you're good at, and they implement that into what they're doing as a church.
Yeah, that's good.
And
that's like the purpose of working at a church. We exist to equip people.
Yeah, definitely. And so we have a lot of stuff on our hearts that we want to talk about and that we are going to love diving into with you guys as listeners, and we want to hear from you guys as well. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But there's only a certain amount of time that people can get. Or there's only a certain amount of time where people on stage speak about a specific topic.
Yeah.
And so I know you're passionate about things that the churches kind of maybe gloss over or don't really dive into a lot.
Yeah, and so I guess like you said, I do get to do some local mission things. I love having the opportunity to do that. That's really what I'm passionate about. And as we get into talking about the sermon series that we're doing, that was kind of a lot of my idea behind that, is a lot of my desire to see the church truly become what God intended it to be, and what Jesus died for. I think there's a lot of phenomenal churches. I think there's so many churches out there that are doing great things, and just people that are pursuing Jesus, right? But as followers of Jesus, it does call us to live a certain way. And so I just love talking about God's plan for people, how that impacts us, and how all this applies to us today in 2020.
That's good.
As this COVID stuff is going on currently in this, but also outside of this, all of this is applicable wherever you're at along the timeline of throughout human history.
Yeah.
And I just think that's super powerful. And that's why the story of the Bible is so compelling, is because it is applicable to any walk of life, no matter where you're at, whatever is going on in your life. The Bible is for you, and
Amen.
And what God has for you is accessible everywhere.
Definitely. Yeah. And we want this podcast to branch into that, or to bleed into that, and really serve as a place where we can have longer discussions, where we can answer questions, tough questions, easy, fun, goofy questions.
Yeah.
We really just want to be able to do all of those things in this time. But specifically why we're starting it right now in this moment is because in our ministries, we have students that are searching and longing for a deeper knowledge of the Bible, and
they're hungry.
Yeah, and we have coaches and volunteers that are in the same place. They want to learn how to talk to students and talk to their brothers and sisters, and we have parents that are wondering how to talk to their kids about certain topics and how to equip. They're searching for equipment to be able to do that, and so we're in this season. We're really going to dive into each message that we're doing on a Wednesday night, and we're going to look at that on a much deeper level and really disassemble it and apply it to our own lives, but then also hopefully give you guys tips and pointers and knowledge from just the Bible that you can take into your everyday life and learn and grow from it. And this isn't meant to be a time where you get everything that you'll ever need to know, because we're not perfect. Yeah. This is hopefully a launching point for you to start that search and start that growth for yourself. And so we're starting a series this week. We've started a series called The Ark, and we're going to look at the beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible and God's intended purpose for humanity and how that plays out, and what he wants for us, and how that has played out through history, through the Israelites and through Jesus and through where we're at right now. And so, James, do you want to talk just a little bit about this past week, what we're kind of diving into and what we're talking about with creation?
So this is a 4-week series, and the Bible is typically, when it's talked about, split into 4 parts. And so we just decided to latch onto that and just to kind of help use that as the foundational framework that we're going to be talking about. But so you have creation, you have fall, you have the redemption, and then new creation. So those are the 4 main parts. And, when we think about them and how they've been talked about, right, we say the creation is, that's Genesis 1-2. That's how God created the world. And then you go into the fall, and then that's from Genesis 3 to the end of the Old Testament. Yeah. Then you have redemption. That's the gospel story. That's Jesus. That's true. That's like hitting it on the head. And then we have new creation. That's Acts to the end of the Bible, right? But when we talk about this as the whole storyline of the Bible, right? We see creation. That is God. Yes, it's God literally creating the world and how he did that, but
and why we need to care for it.
And why we need to care for it. But it's more than that. It's talking about God's plan for people. This is where God institutes his design and puts his blueprint for humanity and human life. Yeah. And I think if you just see that as God physically creating, you miss how he created us emotionally and intellectually and socially, how he created us to exist
together.
Right? Yeah. And so Matthias brought the word this last week, and it was really good. Loved hearing it. And like we said, this is just a platform where we can go in a little deeper. And so I'm going to talk a little more about that. But so this week we talked about creation, right? And we think about creation, and I think a lot of people, when you hear Christians and creation, how we're supposed to care for the environment, all those things, I think there's a lot of good things there that could be added to the conversation. But more than that, this is where really some of my passion for local missions and justice comes in, and so Matthias talked a little briefly on Leviticus 25 of the year of Jubilee, right? So 25 talks about the Sabbath and how resting and why that's important. And even part of that, that's God's blueprint for saying, work doesn't define you. Like what you do, how you provide, like the work that you have to do, that's not defining you. And so we're actually going to willingly take a day to not push that, like try to roll that ball forward.
Yeah.
And we're going to be able just to rest and think about what God's done for us and thank God for those things. And that even all those things are designed to shift your focus from yourself and what you're doing in your daily life and just shift that focus on God, which is really cool, right?
Amen.
But then we see the year of Jubilee come in, and this is God saying like, hey, this is how justice is going to be instilled. And one of my favorite verses that he says, he's talking about, he's like, hey, you're not going to take advantage of these people. You're going to create these rules. After 7 years, the property is going to go back to who owned it. And so if you're making contracts and things, like you have to think of it in those things when you charge people prices. It's got to all go back to those different things, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of verse 17, actually, I'll just read 16 and 17. It says, the more years until the next Jubilee, the higher the price. The fewer years, the lower the price. And so that's if you're selling property. It says, after all, the person selling the land is actually selling you a certain number of harvests. But this next verse really sums it up. It says, show your fear of God by not taking advantage of each other. I am the Lord your God, right? So that's like Yahweh declaring, like, hey, you will respect me by how you respect other people. And so justice should be done in this way. And this is what justice looks like when it comes to like selling property, right? So everyone's like farmers in this time.
Yeah.
Like it's a very agricultural society.
Job was living.
Yeah, and so that's like
gotta survive.
That's what people did, and so this is that like your ownership in that property is like the currency, and that's where power. That's how power structures existed, you know. And so that's like God saying, "Hey, my plan for people is that you will show justice and you won't take advantage of people." And so he instituted this thing called the Year of Jubilee, and that is not something that was utilized to its fullest potential.
No.
Like obviously you don't see that anywhere in today's society, and I think people would be like, no, we don't. I don't really want that to happen, right? But like, dang, what would the world look like?
Yeah, man.
If for the last 2,000 years and more, right? If we followed that, and what would power structures look like? How would the world be different? And this is like, God created us to be in community with people. I don't think anyone would deny that.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the creation story, like it's really God laying his blueprint. Like he wanted to be in community with us walking in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And Matthias used that verse in Genesis 3:8, I believe it was. And it's like, God coming down in the cool of the evening to walk.
Yeah.
Like
to be with his creation, to be with his people.
And that like blows my mind. Just imagining like, and a huge thing that we talk with students about in parents, like God feels far away.
Yeah.
And it's like,
old man in the chair in the clouds
like
with the gold.
All the imagery comes to mind, and like that's not God's plan for people.
No.
And I was talking to Andy, our campus pastor at Shadow Lake, this morning, and someone was sharing something. They're like, I know this is God's plan for people, or God, this was like God meant for this to happen, or something along those lines. And I remember I just said, I was like, but it's not though.
But how do you? Yeah.
But like. That's not God's plan for people. This brokenness that we see in the world, the sickness we see in the world, that is not God's plan for people. No. And so like, how do we live in that, And that is creation, right? We see this story of perfection lay out so briefly in the Bible. And Zayne, I guess a question for you, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Oh, yeah.
Why do you think that storyline, right? Like, if Genesis took place, right? So let me back up. Let me give you a little context.
Okay.
And so if that story is laid out, I'm gonna go on a limb and say like not every single part of that is literal.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say
I think a lot of it
even
could
just
be
like the timeline of it, right?
Yep.
So you read the storyline, it's like God created the world. The next day we screw it up. You know what I mean? So my question for you is like, what do you think it would have felt like to be in that perfect garden, in that creation, walking with God through the garden? And how would that change our perspective if we could physically feel that today? How would that shift our perspective to what's going on around us?
Just in the world right now.
Yeah.
Oh man. First, what it would feel like to be in that moment, just in the presence of God, walking in his perfect creation as perfect beings. It could only, I can't even begin to imagine what that would have actually been like.
Yeah.
But I think we have an understanding of it in some fashion because we have the Holy Spirit living within us, because we have the Spirit of God with us constantly, because of Jesus' death and resurrection and
so we have that glimpse.
Ascension.
We have a glimpse of what perfection looks like.
Yeah,
what
and so
it should look like.
I believe that in the beginning there was heaven and there was earth, there was perfection and there was God's perfect creation, and they were together. Yeah. God was with them, and then through sin, through the years of all of that, and just thousands of years, it split. And through Jesus's death and resurrection, God's intended purpose for creation to be made perfect again, to be redeemed, to be saved, is playing out. Yeah. And we see that. And I think that's through hopefully what we're doing now by evangelizing with this podcast and reaching out to people that might not be able to hear it, and then adding another to the body, adding another to the kingdom. And the Bible lays it out, and this is one we could spend another whole podcast talking about. Can you actually make God come back to earth sooner, make Jesus come to the earth sooner by reaching out to people?
Yeah, I've heard some different theories about that.
We could spend a lot of time talking about it, but the Bible says when every voice on earth has heard, that's the time. But we don't know when that's going to be. Yeah. We have no idea. So, going back to it, being in the presence of God in that moment would have just been unfathomable. And I would love to think that if I was in Adam's shoes, I would have not ate the fruit. But let me tell you, I would have ate that fruit, boy. I would have loved it too, because I'm a sinful human being. Yeah. But changing the perspective of now, obviously it's easy to look back and think, if I wouldn't have done this, I could have been able to do this. But we can't change that, right? The old me is gone. The new me is here. And so how do I move forward, recognizing that truth, recognizing the sin that I've lived with, and change that, and pursue God and bring people with me and point each other towards Jesus?
I think as we go through this series, right? So the arc of the Bible, it wraps back up to itself, right? And it references itself so many times. And as we see from creation at the beginning, we see fall, redemption, the process of God stepping in and intervening on our behalf when we mess up. And then we'll see new creation. That's kind of the full circle thing, right? So I'm excited to see how kind of this plays out, and that's what we're talking about. So the creation is God's original blueprint, but that new creation, that's wrapping that back up, and that's where do we see the glimpses of God's original blueprint coming to fruition? And seeing these things happen, right? And you can even talk about God tried to instill some of that stuff with the laws and Leviticus and all those things, and we saw that wasn't a viable plan for us, because there's still room for us to mess it up, and we're going to get all into that in the following weeks, and I'm looking forward to it. But that's where we're headed with the arc, and so we're trying to really talk about the whole storyline of the Bible, and I think it's just so powerful. If we can understand the whole storyline and the plot of the Bible, where it's headed, it talks so much about who God is, and I think it erases a lot of questions. Not erases, that's probably not a good way to say it, but probably answers and touches base on a lot of questions of is God a good God?
Oh, right? Man.
When you look at the whole storyline of the Bible, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but that's where we are. We just finished up creation this week. We're getting into the fall and talking about where did we mess up God's blueprint for people, and how do we still mess up God's original plan and blueprint for people. So that's where we're headed. I think it's going to be great. Guys, if you guys have any questions or comments of things that you're hearing about it, we would love to be able to try to tackle these as we're getting into this. So we'll be hitting up the fall of next week, the redemption after that, and then new creation. So how does this come full circle in that fourth week, kind of being the end of that series?
Definitely. So yes, like James said, this is where we're headed. This is what we're doing in the moment. But if you guys have questions about this that you want answered, we would love to talk about those specific things, and we have stuff on our hearts that we're going to talk about, but we would love nothing more than to get to answer your questions. We want this to be relational and a two-sided thing. We don't want you to just turn it on and just sit there. You have enough of those things with Netflix and YouTube and all that stuff. So we love that you guys have tuned in to listen to this, and we hope that you'll invite some friends, some family, sit down, listen to it in the car ride or whatever you choose to do. And we'll bring it back next week and dive a little bit deeper into the fall of humanity, which is an enormous topic. But it's an enormous topic. It's going to be super, super good.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.